I thought moving into my late grandfather's cabin would be my peaceful comeback story. Fresh air, quiet woods, maybe even time to finally fix my sleep schedule. But instead, I walked right into a real-life Stepford Wives HOA hellscape with a bridge blockade and a woman who looked like Dolores Umbridge in orthopedic shoes. It all started the day I pulled into Pine Lake. I'd just lost my job in Denver, a tech gig I actually liked until I accidentally exposed a major data breach at a company that rhymes with Pepsi, Q blacklisting, layoffs, and a delightful divorce. So yeah, I was thrilled to drive 2 hours into the woods to restart my life from a creaky, pine-scented cabin I hadn't seen since Boy Scout days. And then I saw it. A bright orange sign slapped across the wooden bridge leading to my grandfather's land. No access, private community property. Unauthorized vehicles will be reported. My first thought, weird prank. Second thought, where's Ashton Kutcher? But no cameras, just a woman in a navy blazer and enough perfume to trigger climate change, stomping up the gravel road like she was about to hand me a pop quiz. I'm Margot Keller, president of the Pine Lake Community Homeowners Association, she chirped, waving a clipboard thick enough to stop bullets. I was still processing her introduction when she pointed at my bumper and said, "You can't park here. The bridge is restricted." I blinked. I live here? Margot didn't flinch. This is community property, and community access is regulated by approved residents only. She said it like she was quoting the Constitution, and I was Benedict Arnold. Now, let me explain something. My grandfather bought that land before the first HOA was even imagined. The man built his own dock, his own mailbox, his own bridge, and now I was being told I needed permission to drive onto it? I handed Margot a copy of the deed, hoping that would end the nonsense. She barely glanced at it. Instead, she pulled a citation booklet from her fanny pack like some suburban Pokemon trainer. Also, she said, scribbling furiously, "Your American flag exceeds our 2-to-1 ratio guideline. Community standards apply to everyone, Mr. Morrison." Seriously? They were measuring patriotism with math now? I should have driven away then, but instead, I did what all good guys in horror movies do. I stayed. Because when life burns down your house, you don't run, you rebuild. Preferably with Wi-Fi. I hauled my stuff across the bridge, unpacked in the dusty cabin, and spent the night Googling, "Can HOA fine you for breathing?" And because this is my life now, the answer was yes. But I wasn't going to back down. My name was on the deed. I had the tax records, the inheritance papers, the legal right to be there. This bridge, it wasn't just wood and bolts. It was a legacy, a line in the sand. If you've ever had a neighbor from hell, or better yet, a clipboard-wielding Karen in kitten heels, smash that like button and tell me your war story in the comments, because mine, oh, it's just getting started. And tomorrow, Marco's going to find out what happens when you try to gatekeep a man with nothing left to lose and a bridge he secretly owns. The next morning, I stepped outside to the smell of pine, the chirp of birds, and the unmistakable sound of adhesive peeling off my front door. Yep, another citation. This time, Margot had dinged me for a mailbox that was 2 inches below regulation height. 2 inches. As if the entire neighborhood's integrity would collapse if my letters leaned a little too low. Now, mind you, I measured it myself. It was exactly 36 inches, but apparently HOA bylaws dictated a window of 36 to 42 inches, measured from the base of the post to the bottom lip of the mailbox, not the top. I didn't even know mailboxes had lips. So, what did I do? I spent 20 minutes with a shovel, lifting the entire post, just to satisfy Queen Margot's ridiculous decree. And guess who showed up mid-shovel sipping iced tea like she was supervising a high school detention. "That's better," she said, scribbling again. "Although, I notice your car is parked at an improper angle." I turned slowly, eye twitching. She pulled out a tiny leveler. Yes, this woman carried measuring equipment like Batman carried batarangs, and explained that community standards require vehicles to be positioned parallel to the property line. I looked at my driveway, then my car, then her. "You know this land curves, right?" I asked. "Your grandfather's driveway was grandfathered in," she replied, smug as a cat who just knocked over a wine glass. "But you are not your grandfather." If this were an episode of The Office, Jim would have looked directly at the camera right then, but I was living it, and there was no camera crew to help me. Over the next 10 days, my house became a Karen battlefield. I got cited for my porch light being excessively bright, my wildflowers being non-conforming plant species, a garden gnome she called a visual disruption to neighborhood cohesion. It wasn't just annoying, it was expensive. Fines ranged from $50.00 to $200.00 each. I was hemorrhaging money faster than Twitter loses advertisers. And every single time Margot showed up personally. "I taught civics for 20 years, she'd say, like that justified turning my lawn into a bureaucratic hellscape. "Rules create order. Order creates harmony." Lady, the purge also had rules. Didn't mean they were good. One afternoon, I tried to fight back. I pointed out that her own house had chipped paint, and that I'd seen her dog off-leash. Her smile cracked for half a second, then reassembled with the force of 1,000 HOA bylaws. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice dipped in condescension, "I am the president of this association. I think I know which rules apply to whom." Ah yes, the old "I make the rules, I break the rules" move. Very Game of Thrones. If Cersei Lannister wore Skechers. And the worst part? Everyone else seemed to accept it. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. A few offered tight-lipped smiles. Nobody said a word. I was the new guy, the outsider, and Margot was the enforcer of some twisted suburban religion. By the end of week 2, I'd paid over $2,800.00 in fines, developed a twitch in my left eye, and was seriously considering installing security cameras, or at least decoy gnomes armed with GoPros. Because deep down I knew this wasn't about long height or mailbox math. This was about control, and Margot wasn't going to stop until I broke, or found a way to flip the script. Little did I know, I had my very own Judas hiding in plain sight, wearing a smile and holding a hedge trimmer. His name was Frank Weber, 60-something, wore khakis with pleats, had the kind of face that screamed, "I grill salmon on Tuesdays and vote in every election, even the local ones." He knocked on my cabin door one morning holding 2 things, a cup of black coffee and a look of rehearsed concern. "Dave," he said, using my first name like we were old college buddies, "wanted to check in after last night's meeting. Margot can be, in understatement of the year. What's next, saying Godzilla had boundary issues?" Frank said he'd been on the HOA board for 8 years. He knew how to work with Margot. He talked about compromise, cooperation, and maybe volunteering for a community cleanup event to earn goodwill. I almost expected him to slide me a bribe wrapped in banana bread. But I was exhausted, broke, and desperately needed someone on my side. So, against my better judgment, I let him in. We met for coffee, chatted about how I could slowly win her over. He even loaned me a hedge trimmer to clean up the wildflower garden. Just Fix the top 3 violations, he said. She'll ease off once she sees effort. And for a while things got better. Margot stopped issuing new citations. Neighbors started waving. Some even chatted for 5 seconds longer than usual. Frank dropped by occasionally to check progress, all warm smiles and compliments like, "That new mulch looks fantastic, Dave. Really shows commitment." But something felt off. My neighbor's curtains twitched every time I stepped outside. A jogger passed by my place twice a day, never breaking a sweat, just watching. And one night, while reorganizing my shed, I caught a reflection in the window. Frank, standing across the street, phone in hand. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was checking emails in the dark, facing my cabin, like a horror movie extra. Sure, totally normal. Then came the HOA letter. A formal complaint accusing me of using power tools after 7 p.m., a violation of Section 14B Evening Noise Ordinance. The kicker? I hadn't touched a power tool all week, but I had talked about organizing my tools with Frank, down to the exact items listed in the complaint. Cue the Law and Order sound effect. I called him. "Frank, did you say something to Margot?" Long pause. "Dave," he said, voice suddenly lower, cooler, "you have to understand. I live here. Margot asked me to keep an eye on things. I didn't have a choice." Didn't have a choice. I hung up before I said something that'd get me fined for excessive sarcasm in a residential zone. Everything he'd done, the compliments, the help, the coffee chats, was surveillance in disguise. He wasn't my neighbor. He was a sleeper agent. I tried warning others, reached out to residents I'd chatted with before. Every response was the same. "I understand, but I really can't get involved. Margot's been good for property values." Don't rock the boat, Dave. Suburbia had spoken. I was alone. Worse, I was out of money, out of allies, and now officially on Margot's radar for talking back. HOA politics wasn't a game, it was the Hunger Games in beige. But I wasn't done yet, because fate was about to throw me a lifeline. Not from a friend, not from a lawyer, but from a cookie tin. A literal tin of cookies. Sort of. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun, I was looking for duct tape. My mailbox flag broke again, and I figured Grandpa's attic might have some old tools, or at least something sticky enough to pass as repair adjacent. Instead, I found a rusted cookie tin wedged behind a stack of National Geographics and a taxidermy duck with one glassy eye. The tin was heavy. It rattled. And inside? Papers. Dozens of them, yellowed, brittle, but intact. Property surveys. Receipts. And then I swear I heard a choir sing a letter dated April 15th, 1960, where my grandfather requested permission to build a private bridge. Read behind it, the county's official approval, dated May 3rd, stamped, signed, sealed. It was like opening a cheat code in The Sims, except instead of infinite money, I had legal ownership of the one thing Margot tried to take from me, the bridge. Turns out, Grandpa had built it himself, paid taxes on it, maintained it every year religiously. There was even a tax ID number, Morrison Bridge 4471. It wasn't community property. It wasn't shared land. It was mine. You Avengers theme. The next morning, I hiked into town like Frodo with a manila folder. At the county clerk's office, a man named Curtis squinted at the documents and laughed. "Oh yeah," he said. "Your granddad was real proud of that bridge. Used to brag about how it was stronger than the county's roads." He tapped the records. "Yep, Still on the books, still in your property tax line item. Son, that bridge is yours. Has been since '61. I nearly cried. Not out of emotion, out of sheer vindication. For 2 weeks I'd been gaslit, fined, and cut off from the world. And all along I'd been paying for the privilege of being trespassed on. I texted Lena Brooks, the paralegal who'd whispered support at the HOA meeting. We met at a cafe where I slapped down the paperwork like I'd just drawn Exodia. Her jaw dropped. Dave, this is massive. The HOA's been blocking your private property. That's criminal mischief. We spent 2 hours dissecting every document. Every permit matched the current bridge. Every tax payment formed a perfect paper trail. Even the love letters from Grandpa to Grandma had lines like, "Someday, you'll cross the bridge I built to come home." Disney couldn't write that kind of poetic justice. "Okay," Lena said, grinning like a lawyer in a courtroom drama finale. "Let's ruin some lives." The plan: present everything at the next emergency HOA meeting. Margot thought she had her clipboard, her bylaws, and her smug little sidekick, Frank. But I had the receipts, literally, in triplicate. And just to make it spicy, I invited Curtis, the county clerk, as my witness. I wanted Margot to learn a lesson that day, not just about property law, but about messing with a man who has nothing to lose and a grandfather who believed in paper trails. The community center was packed tighter than a Trader Joe's parking lot at 5 p.m. Word had spread. The bridge drama was about to climax. And the popcorn was metaphorical, but the tension was real. Margot arrived, flanked by Frank, and a guy in a suit so stiff he looked like he was auditioning for a reboot of Suits, her HOA attorney. She wasted no time launching into a speech that sounded like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror and maybe a full-length American flag. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "we're here because Mr. Morrison has made extraordinary claims regarding bridge ownership. Rest assured, the HOA has kept impeccable records." Cue polite applause from the HOA cult choir. I stood, took a breath, and calmly handed out copies of the original county permit from 1960. Then the tax records. Then the receipts. Then the photo of Grandpa standing proudly on his freshly built bridge like Gandalf with a hammer. And finally I said, "This isn't a complaint. This is a fact. I own the bridge. You blocked my property. You isolated me. You cost me jobs, deliveries, groceries, and you charged me for it." Curtis, the county clerk, stood up from the back like some kind of Gandalf meets Hank Hill hybrid. "I processed those taxes myself," he said, voice gravelly and slow. "That bridge belongs to Dave Morrison, just like it did to his grandfather. The HOA's been trespassing for decades." Dead. Silence. Then Margot's attorney whispered something to her. Her face blanched like milk had curdled in her soul. He turned to the room. "These documents appear authentic." She tried a final Hail Mary. "Even if he owns it, Mr. Morrison cannot unilaterally block community access without formal notice and easement consideration." Which is lawyer for "we're screwed unless he's feeling generous." It was not. But I was strategic. I gave the community 48 hours. Then I installed a wooden sign at the bridge. "Private bridge. Please nod when crossing. Thank you." No padlocks, no chains. Just a simple request. Acknowledge that you're stepping onto my land. And if you don't, enjoy the scenic 3-mile hike around the lake. The effect was... Most neighbors nodded. Some mumbled thanks. A few grumbled and nodded anyway. She stood at the rope for 10 full minutes, arms folded, waiting for me to appear and lower it, like I was her butler. I didn't. She took the long route. 3 days of detours later, she finally called. We met at the same coffee shop where Linu and I hatched the revenge plan. But this time, Margot was human. No clipboard, no scolding tone, just a tremble in her hand and a quiet, "Dave, I think we can work something out." I slid over the terms. Calm, cold, ironclad. Drop all fines. Refund the $4,200, 0 cents. Public apology video to be posted on the HOA bulletin. 1 week per year of Freedom Week. No citations issued. $25,000, 0 cents. Paid for legal easement rights. He balked. The terms are excessive. I sipped my coffee. They're educational. 2 days later, the HOA voted to accept. Margot's video apology was awkward, tearful, and everything I'd ever dreamed. I watched it twice before breakfast. 6 months later, the HOA had new leadership, fewer citations, more block parties. My mailbox stayed crooked, and no one cared. I turned the whole ordeal into a side hustle, property law consulting for suburban survivors like me. And every time a neighbor crossed that bridge, they nodded, not because a sign told them to, but because they finally understood what that bridge really meant. Independence, boundaries, and the price of pushing the wrong guy too far. So yeah, the HO tried to trap me, but I owned the bridge. Literally. If you've ever gone toe-to-toe with a clipboard, Karen, drop your war story in the comments. Smash that like button like I smashed HOA protocol, and subscribe for more tales of suburban justice, one petty revenge at a time. And remember, sometimes the best defense is a bridge with a tax ID.